assuming that you could drive and had a car and got a vanity license plate for it, what do you think you would put on yours?
I think it would say PDMSTR, Podmaster.
Oh, dear.
Just because of my love of pod people. This time we watch Season 6, Episode 19, Red Zone Cuba.
The film that dares you to watch.
But first, some follow-up, or rather some important news. Live from the internet, it's Frank and Trace!
You know, I'm so glad we're going to get to talk about them a lot this episode because their chemistry in the sketches in this is magnificent. And I just want to celebrate everything Frank and Trace. And I'm so glad that we get to do this because they will be doing a live stream soon.
And most importantly, this is going to be a live riffing. So no, this isn't going to be one of those how to draw streams that you see on YouTube. No, this is no tutorial. They are going to be doing a live riff of Glenn or Glenda.
Which is an actually good movie. Let's be clear. This is a brilliant movie, but still one that you could poke fun at. They've been doing this show of them making fun of, or riffing, Glenn or Glenda. They've been touring it for a while now, and by all accounts, it's both very good and also, importantly, apparently, and I mean, everybody has to be their own judge about this sort of thing, but apparently it's not awful about trans people. This is Frank and Trace talking about it, not, Mike.
Yeah. So you're guaranteed that things are going to edge on the corner of good taste rather than bad for this.
So the live show will be happening on Tuesday, the 21st. And not only are we going to finally get to see this, because as far as I know, they've never come up to Canada with this show. So we'll finally get to see it, you and I.
And they never will, given Frank's criminal record.
Well, that's possible. But it's a $10 ticket. And some of that money goes to the NAACP Empowerment Program, which is lovely, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But what if you say $10 is a little too stiff for you? Or what if you'd rather give all $10 to a good cause and get to see the show for free?
Why, I'd say sign me up. If only there was a way we could do that. How can we help, Chris?
Well, we can help because we here at It's Just a Show are proud to say that we have got 2 complimentary free tickets that will go to a nice listener who writes in following the special instructions that will be revealed at some point during this show to info@itsjustashow.com. That's right. Just do that. We'll tell you how at some point. Oh, you don't get to stop listening 3 minutes in. No. You've got to keep going. But we will tell you what to send us if you want to get the free tickets. If you want to be entered for a chance to be randomly selected to get the free tickets. Let's be clear, not everybody, unless only 2 people write in which case we will be very sad, but they will be very lucky.
Mm-hmm. And also, priority will be given to those who have an It's Just a Show decoder ring.
So yes, keep listening and then get that email to us by the end of the day, by midnight on the night of Saturday, the 18th, and we will send out the tickets, and then you can watch the show with us Tuesday, the 21st. And I'm told that if for some reason you're busy when it's being live streamed, you'll still, with a ticket, be able to watch it at your leisure later. So that's good.
It's not just live, it's video on demand. We live in the future.
Woo! Speaking of video on demand, if you missed our live stream recently, then you can still watch it. It's still going to be available to you for the foreseeable future, and you won't have to pay $10, some of which will go to a good cause, although you're welcome to give us $10 or give $10 to a good cause because you enjoyed it so much. We had an episode of the weekly panel show that I host called Take Your Pick. Adam was a guest, as well as a bunch of other cool people, and we talked about video game soundtracks.
Yes, for those who have been missing a full proper scorner, because we've had several micro scorners over the last little while, well, then you get a smorgasbord of it, as myself, as well as many other panelists, are talking about their favorite video game soundtracks, often selecting a track each to highlight the greatness of such things as Mega Man 2, and somebody picked Journey, and I still don't know what that is.
Oh, it's a really charming video game. Oh. But yes, we're joined by friends of the show, including Mikey from This Is Your Mixtape, and Sarah from a part of our Scaritage, and less likely people such as Simone from Polygon, and video game composer Pete Gresser. Oh, we had a good time with a bunch of people. Go check that out. It's a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And you can do that by going to megaphonic.fm/pick.
You'll be glad you did.
Now, that's all the good news we have for today.
Now it's nothing but bad news.
Now we have to talk about Red Zone Cuba.
Oh, God. Why? Oh, man. Ooh.
This time we watch Season 6, Episode 19, Red Zone Cuba.
But first, some pleasing lip and tongue action in the form of a short. Speech! Platform posture and appearance. In this short, we are shown the right and wrong ways to make a speech, how best to get the public's attention, and most importantly, how to do an awkward dance by holding onto your knees and rotating. Rest assured that last one was the Do the Bartman of 1949. Thanks, Centron. Anywho, the short shows us a few examples of bad posture, such as the rocking horse types who sway as they talk, and the telephone pole types who just stand there rigid and anxious. On top of that, we're left with the important words to think tall, stand tall, talk tall, and walk tall. Now, if Jordan Baker's performance in Walking Tall can be appreciated as an example, then good posture really does work for gathering audience's attention.
And now, our feature presentation, Red Zone Cuba. Oh, I don't get a jazz band. Okay, fine. We begin with a cameo by John Carradine, who, it turns out, remembers well the events of the movie we're about to watch. He sings a little song as the credits roll, and we go back in time to the year 1961. Griffin, played by our auteur Coleman Francis, has escaped prison, and on the lonesome road, he runs into Cook and Landis, two drifters who are totally fine having another drifter join them. So the three of them make their way to Cherokee Jack, a pilot who flies them to some sort of military facility. Turns out the U.S. is looking for a few good men, or a few drifters without ID, to help invade Cuba. And so, after a tedious training montage, we get a tedious recreation of the Bay of Pigs invasion. Our heroes are supposed to disrupt some infrastructure before the main troops arrive, but oh well, they're immediately captured. This leads to a tedious series of executions, but eventually they figure out an escape plan. Their commanding officer, Justine or something. Anyway, he wants to escape with them, but he's on death's door. So, instead, he just tells them that back home he's got a valuable mine filled with precious metals. So, they leave without him, and they steal a plane, and they head to Chastain's mine. Now, along the way, they stop at a cafe that's doing quite badly, run by an ancient man whose daughter is a blind piano player. Well, so of course, they do the only natural thing to do in such a situation, and they kill the cafe owner by throwing him down a well. I guess to steal his car? I don't know. A bunch of stuff happens here. It's intensely confusing, but eventually they get to Chastain's wife, and it's another tedious montage as they get ready to go to the mine. But on their way to the mine, before they get there, stuff happens. I guess the law catches up with them. And I guess it turns out that Justine is still alive, but then Coleman Francis gets shot, so that's nice. I don't know. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, we open with Mike and the Bots announcing this week's lotto numbers, as each ball shoots out of Tom's plastic dome. It culminates with the winning Powerball number 509. Incidentally, MST3K episode 509 is The Girl in Lover's Lane, one of the best episodes of this show. In Deep 13, things are decidedly less celebratory as TV's Frank frets about owing 50 large to the mob. Frank does what any honorable man would do and sends Dr. Forrester to meet the sinister gangsters sent to break Frank's legs. We return to Deep 13 for segment 2, where Frank tries to cajole a distraught and badly beaten Dr. Forrester. The mad scientist has so much to live for, if only he could fix his posture. Frank rouses Dr. F out of bed and forces him to do that hands-on-knees jig from the short, while the mad doctor's bones shatter with every move. The pressure gets to Mike for segment 3, causing him to transform into Skidoo star Carol Channing. The bots razz him a little bit, but Mike Carroll is offended by Tom and Crow's good-natured ribbing. He eventually snaps out of it. In Deep 13, celebrities are anxious to hear about the status of Dr. Forrester. Jimmy Carter calls to make sure Dr. F is dead, and Mother Teresa sends him a nice hope you die wreath. Segment 4 sees us back in Deep 13 as Dr. F struggles to decide whether or not this is the end. Ultimately, the Mad Doctor chooses life, just as Frank is getting bored. As Dr. F gets out of bed to embrace life, he's revisited by the goons sent to break all the bones in Frank's body, and is promptly beaten to near death again. In the final segment, Mike, Tom, Crow, and Gypsy sing a nice, bouncy, upbeat song titled, What Else? The Bouncy Upbeat Song. The song proves to be an acceptable way of metaphorically showering the grime of yet another Coleman Francis movie off of them. We close with Dr. F healing from his beating the only way he knows how, by choking Frank to death. Oh man, so this is it. We've finally done all 3 Coleman Francis movies. Chris, how many years have you aged in this project?
Well, let's not forget that it is 2020, which is a natural cause of aging for many people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this episode first aired in December of 94, so, a little over 25 years ago, if I did my math right there, which I probably didn't. No, that's right.
Yeah. I was on the edge of my seat with math.
And so when I first saw it when it first aired, I knew it was a very special episode, for it was one of the worst movies they had ever done. Really, the only competition at that point was Monster A Go-Go. Certainly both of those movies are far worse than Manos. But anyway, I decided to put this one in a special glass case with a sign that said break in case of emergency. And I guess this podcast was the emergency, because now I have finally watched it for the second time. And oh boy, this is a bad movie.
Yes.
Perfectly good episode. Bad movie.
I guess we did the dangerous thing in marathoning the Coleman Francis movies instead of spreading them out. Having not learned the lesson that they learned in KTMA when they watched all the Gamera movies all at once. It's a punishing exercise, but we do it for this show.
These are worse than Gamera movies. Let's be clear.
These are much less charming than Gamera. I know that a lot of people talk about how Coleman Francis had capabilities as an actor, but you know what? I'm just not seeing it.
They aren't on display in any of these 3 movies, and they weren't on display in This Island Earth, so I don't think it's true.
No, especially here, because this is Coleman Francis' tour de force performance. This is his shining hour, really, unless you count the plum role he gets as narrator in Beast of Yucca Flats.
He does a better job with that, I think.
Much. But that's only because he has a great gravelly kind of voice that's good for like sinister narration. Had he lived, he would have been a terrific search for an extremely Poverty Row version of In Search Of. But seeing him here, he's got one facial expression, which is dour, and then he delivers his lines accordingly, and that's kind of it. And he's playing such an empty, angry character that it's just a slog to watch him whenever he's on screen. That said, Mike and the Bots do make the best of it. I was thrilled with the many, many references to Three Stooges, which are hard to ignore because, with the exception of Anthony Cardoza not being a great Larry, the other two are a perfect Moe and Curly.
I'm not sure that we can totally blame Coleman Francis for his poor acting in this movie. I think quite a lot of the blame lies on the hands of the director, Coleman Francis. Mm-hmm. He just didn't know what to do with Coleman Francis. No. I mean, Coleman Francis was there. He was willing and committed to play the part of a sort of anti-hero, as a genuinely awful person who bungles up everything he touches and is just gonna die before the end of the movie. There's a lot you could do with that, and yet Coleman Francis couldn't direct that, couldn't capture that, and just kept taking the same shots and just kept driving it to the ground.
Now, you joke, but I do think that the thing standing in Coleman Francis's way was indeed Coleman Francis.
It certainly wasn't Tony Cardoza.
No.
Hey, can I say also, one of the things about not having seen this episode for 20-something years is that I did not remember anything about this short. Mm-hmm. I saw the title of the short and thought it was 2 or 3 other potential MST3K shorts that they had done, but no, it was none of those. It was some other thing about speech and posture. I guess vaguely I remember the dance, the little roll around on your knees to show that you are loose and limber dance, but yeah, that's it.
That was mostly what I remembered, although I attributed it in my mind. I always thought that was part of Posture Pals, the one with the kids.
Yeah, I know. I remember Posture Pals.
Yeah, because they all get Burger King hats.
That's right. Anyway, it was a perfectly fine short. I don't know if I loved it, but it was perfectly great.
Mm-hmm. I do want to say, it's like, now, is it just me? Because like I watched both this movie and the unmisted version because I'm committed to research, which is probably why I hate myself extra today. But one thing I tried to find and found no evidence of, like, there's no like old conductor standing in for John Carradine when they show up at the night train.
Nope.
Like At no point does that character ever come back. He's just at the beginning. So I really think the perfect way to end the movie, despite that great closing line, is like, he ran all the way to hell with nothing but a penny and a broken cigarette. Despite that, they should have cut back to the reporter and John Carradine and be like, excuse me, Mr. Conductor. It's like, you weren't part of that story. How did you know? It's like, well, I'm watching the picture, aren't I? And then he turns and looks at the camera. And then the end shows up with a big question mark.
Yeah. It's absolutely ridiculous that this whole movie is supposed to be from the perspective of the train driver who has no interaction with the characters whatsoever on a train that they've hopped. So they don't even, there's no reason why he would even know they were on the train.
Let alone their whole sordid story.
But Carradine sells it.
Oh, yeah. Well, again, he's the closest thing that the movie has to an actor. And you know what? Carradine's a pro, so he's able to sell it.
Yeah, he's fine with it.
Not to mention, I've got to say, now, maybe it's just me, but I actually like the song Night Train to Mundo Fine.
It's fine.
I like the song, and I love Carradine's croaky delivery. I think John Carradine has the voice that Leonard Nimoy wishes he had.
Well, that's probably true. And that Leonard Cohen is kind of glad he narrowly escaped.
Oh, I would gladly take a night of songs of John Carradine over Leonard Cohen.
Oh.
I'm throwing my Canadian heritage in the trash, and I'm hopping on Team Carradine.
All right. Well, when you hear Carradine's cover album of Leonard Cohen's songs, we'll see how you feel.
I do. Yeah, that would be the only listenable version of Hallelujah available.
Fair. The other great thing about this episode, as I alluded to at the top of the show, is Frank and Trace. Oh, wow. Did the sketches let them shine?
Yeah, I think that's something that's like fairly common if memory serves. Again, we'll see how this goes. I don't know if it was just knowledge that Frank was leaving or what, but it seems like season 6, they're really leaning into Deep 13. And this is a perfect example of it, where the almost Looney Tunes-like relationship that they have is just given endless variations. And it's always fun because those two are such capable performers. But they have such a different skill set, both Trace and Frank. I mean, Frank is the master of a total lack of sincerity. He's deadpan. He's everything he says drips with a really funny sarcasm. There's always that ironic distance to the way that Frank played TV's Frank. That was always so funny. It was always more than just a bumbling goon. And I guess that's why future bumbling goons on the show never made quite the same impression as Frank did. And then you have, of course, Trace as Dr. Forrester. And Trace, I've always maintained, has the physical gifts of John Cleese in his prime. Like, I really, really do. I think that he's an incredibly gifted physical comedian who, like, uses his large frame and lanky body to be really funny, which is to say nothing of his gifts as a mimic.
Yes. I mean, that's the thing that especially got me. I mean, there's so many good things in terms of the physical comedy, as you've been saying, but the moment where I cackled with laughter was when TV's Frank picks up the phone and it's Jimmy Carter on the line, and you just hear Trace's fantastic Jimmy Carter voice quickly and quietly going, "Is it dead yet?"
Yes, Mr. President.
Is he dead yet?
I'll let you know just as soon as he dies. Yes,
it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. This is a treasure trove of an episode. I've always loved it. Now, whether or not it's a good Baby's First MST3K really all depends on how much you can take Coleman Francis.
I think this episode, in many ways, I think even the Frank and Trace stuff really depends upon you having seen it before. Like, you need to know what these characters' relationship is to really appreciate what's going on. I don't think this is a terribly good first episode.
Yeah, that's true. I can concede that, because, again, you're getting a very different variation on the usual Dr. F and Frank shenanigans.
But, like, that's the other thing. Frank explicitly is trying to kill Dr. F throughout this entire episode and is just waiting and hoping for him to die, which is a well that they'd come back to again and again and again and again, especially in the sci-fi era of various characters wanting to kill each other. Ha 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 ha. And this is one of the few times where I think it was completely funny and charming.
Yes. Well, I think it's because there are layers to how they're playing it versus just kind of like playing it as is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I said, it's like everything that Frank does is like so doused in irony and his own TV encyclopedia brain for what it could possibly connect to in terms of a thing he saw when he was like 9 years old. So that you get that extra kind of filter. And like I said, I think Trace is one of the most underrated comedy performers ever. Just a brilliant comic presence, both vocally and physically. Hard to live up to that.
Speaking of brilliant presences, let us continue down the story of Coleman Francis Coleman and Tony Cardoza.
Well, I'll mention this right off the bat before we get too deep into the final chapter of Coleman Francis and Anthony Cardoza. Don't watch the uncut version of Red Zone Cuba. I know many of you are tempted.
Oh, right. I didn't see that. What happens in the uncut version?
Well, for the most part, it's just longer. And I'd seen some things on IMDb just saying, oh, hey, these scenes are longer in this version. So I was kind of watching with curiosity, but nothing registered until really late in the movie. Something incredibly shocking happens that I was not prepared for.
Okay.
So that part where they go to the store and that guy's store/restaurant thingy.
Oh, yes. And throw the guy down the well.
Yeah. And during that whole time, like in the MST3K version, Mike and the Bots leave for a sketch while the blind daughter just plays piano mindlessly, seemingly having not heard a single thing over her own piano.
Right.
But Coleman Francis never one to shy away from the darker aspects of human nature. In addition to robbing the store/restaurant, he goes into the house, he picks up the daughter, throws her on the bed, and then proceeds to sexually assault her.
What?
Yeah, that really happens. And you'd think it's like, oh God, that must be like a long, arduous scene, like the infamous bit that was taken out of Side Hackers.
Right.
But it's not. It just happens to be like, P.S. There's a rape scene.
Oh, man.
Just for you. Just enjoy that, but only for a few seconds. Bye.
What does that... All right. So, like, the whole movie does, in various ways, paint Coleman Francis' character to be terrible. Mm-hmm. And I guess this is part of that. But, like, I don't know. Why? What is that doing there?
Yeah, it's not like it makes him worse, really, because he's already so bad.
Yeah, I mean, it does. I guess it makes it more, on the screen, so to speak.
Yeah, I suppose that's true, because otherwise it was mostly just grunts and choking. We needed to know he was a real bad guy.
Ugh.
So, yeah.
Well, great. Well, all right. Let's find out more about these people who decided that needed to be committed to film.
Well, first, I guess going with the facts of the piece, I'm seeing in a lot of places under trivia that this movie was shot in 61 and released in 66, but I don't think that's actually true. If you have any knowledge to the contrary, again, info at It's Just a Show, but that would mean it was shot before Skydivers. And I don't think this shows that. I mean, say what you will about Red Zone Cuba, it's not quite as inept as the Skydivers. It's a lot easier to follow in terms of editing.
Mostly, sort of.
I'd say it's got a professional sheen to it that the Skydivers lack.
It doesn't have as spectacular failures, let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way of putting it. And, I don't think they could have gotten John Carradine back in there, Tor Johnson, and Nobody Days with Beast of Yucca Flats and the Skydivers. So I think the shot in 61 thing is a misnomer. And I read interviews with Cardoza, and he always refers to this as the last movie they did. And I don't think he would just say that because it was released last.
Right.
And I don't think every movie they shot had like 5 years in the vault.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is the movie where they ultimately broke up.
Oh.
Yeah, this is the end of an era. This is like listening to Abbey Road.
Was there a lot of fighting on the set?
No. In fact, it was more of kind of a slow burn. It was Anthony Cardoza sort of realizing, wait a minute, I'm doing everything.
Wait a minute, even I am better than this.
I mean, kind of. After doing 3 pictures with Coleman Francis, it became obvious that all Coleman was going to do was hand him a script and say, I'm the director, so I'm going to boss everybody around on the set. You've got to do everything else. So you have Coleman being the big boss on the set, but Anthony is acting in these movies. He is learning to edit while trying to edit these movies, and then he's got to sell and arrange for distribution.
So what does he do?
He ultimately said that's it, and he quits the motion picture business. And while he hasn't gone into details in any of the interviews I've read, at that point, his friendship, which was pretty friendly with Coleman Francis, soured.
Sure.
Soured completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think Coleman is probably the sort of person who doesn't take that sort of thing well.
No. Although, funnily enough, with all the talk of Coleman Francis's drinking problems making him unemployable, that's the one thing Cardoza sort of clears up, at least from his memory, that was never a problem. That was never anything. In fact, he said that all Coley would drink, appropriately enough, was cola. He would have cola and aspirin.
Oh, sure.
He would just mix the two. It's like, it keeps me up. I guess anything to keep that body moving, that's the moneymaker. And so Cardoza doesn't end up producing any other pictures until we get to the Hellcats, which is a whole other story.
Well, that wasn't that much later. That was only 68.
Yeah, or 67. But still, it's less having to be in the motion picture business and more I have to get away from the Coleman Francis motion picture business is what he realized.
Fair enough. Everybody needed to do that.
And time was not kind to Coleman Francis. I mean, not just in that when you revisit these movies, you're like, who the hell is this guy? And what was he thinking? But in the intervening years, the last time that Anthony Cardoza ever saw Coleman Francis, he said he looked like he was about Tor Johnson's weight.
Okay.
So he had completely ballooned up and said that towards the end, he was weighing about 350 pounds.
Oh.
And he, for the most part, he said he felt sorry for him, but things didn't work out and he didn't want to get sucked back into the Coleman Francis whirlwind of creativity, and decided to focus on things that would actually make money and allow him to take care of himself and his family. Fair
enough.
Yeah. And then, the final chapter with Coleman is that his death is a bit of a mystery. In that, and I'm going from an interview with Cardoza here, and we'll have a link in our show notes. It's the same one with Tom Weaver that we've linked to previously. But Coleman Francis' body was ultimately found in the back of a station wagon at the Vine Street Ranch Market. And to this day, nobody really knows if it was natural causes or not. That seems to be a bit of a mystery. There was a plastic bag over his head and a tube going into his mouth, but no one's really sure if he committed suicide, because that's not really enough. I mean, the tube would suggest a breathing or drinking apparatus of some kind, but nothing was ever really found.
Well, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's sad because, Coleman's whole thing is that he has a total lack of talent. He's not meant to write pictures. He's not meant to direct pictures. And as far as I can tell, he's certainly not meant to star in pictures. But there had to be a place for him. It's a real tragedy that he got sort of wrapped up in the promises of Hollywood, because the only really great thing that he did, aside from arguably the narration of Beast of Yucca Flats, is that he was in Beyond the Valley of the Dolls playing a drunk.
Right. Maybe he could make a good grilled cheese sandwich.
Maybe he was a good person to just talk your ear off all night. Maybe he was an entertainer and a raconteur that just didn't translate. Although I have a weird feeling that all of Coleman Francis' stories ends with, and then he died horribly.
Okay, well, if you enjoyed last episode's look at Puerto Rico, Progress Island, USA.
And who didn't?
You're going to love our next topic.
Yes, let's talk about the Bay of Pigs. Oh, boy.
For some reason, Coleman Francis decided this movie needed to take place during the Bay of Pigs invasion, or at least partially, even though this film has absolutely no interest in what happened in the Bay of Pigs invasion.
No, you get there and you get away from it as soon as possible.
And it's just a weird setup for the third act, which itself none of this movie matters. It's a completely nihilistic movie. But anyway, here's the thing. When you grew up in Canada, I grew up in the States, though I live in Canada now.
Yeah.
And Canadians often have a very different sense of Cuba than Americans do.
Well, yes, because we continued trading with Cuba when there was, of course, pressure to discontinue that from the United States for quite some time.
Exactly. I grew up with Cuba being one of the big baddie countries in the world. And, obviously you wouldn't go there, but obviously it was also just like a terrible axis of evil kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And, I think perhaps the rest of the world doesn't share that opinion quite the same way.
No, that's a good hunch. That's a good hunch.
And some of the stuff that happened with the Bay of Pigs invasion, I think, sort of underlines the weird relationship between America and Cuba and how Americans typically tend to think about Cuba, or at least used to. I don't know if it's still true. And I should also say, I'm no expert on this, and a lot of these issues are very contentious, so I'm going to try to put out this information as best I can. But please, if you're interested or you want to feel confident in anything you learn about today, read a book. Read a book, watch a movie, watch a documentary. I don't know. Find somebody who actually knows what they're talking about and go for that. This is just meant to get you a little bit intrigued, a little bit excited, and a little bit curious to learn more.
Yeah, it's a Bay of Pigs appetizer. It's a Bay of what is it?
Pigs in a
blankets.
blanket. Yeah, that's the joke we're looking for here. Okay. So as you probably know, Cuba is really close to Florida. Much closer than Puerto Rico is. Cuba's a little over 100 miles away from Florida, maybe a little under 200 kilometers. So Cuba can be very important for America's sense of security. So in 1952, there had been a president of Cuba named Carlos Prio, and it was about election time again. And he was okay, I guess, as a president. I mean, he was fine as far as I can tell. I have no idea. But there was an ambitious young man named General Fulgencio Batista who decided to lead a military coup instead of having an election. And you know who he was backed by? America. So his military coup is successful.
Yeah, and in fact, that's kind of always how this story was sort of taught in Canadian history, which is that, by 1959, a young hero by the name of Fidel Castro takes over and frees Cuba for the Cubans.
Exactly, because Batista was a completely awful, brutal dictator, and he basically turned Cuba into a place where a very small number of people made quite a lot of money, and, he had business ties with the American mafia and things like that. Like, it was just awful. It was just awful.
Yeah, it's a mess.
So by 1958, Fidel Castro manages to successfully foment a revolution and take power. And what does he do? Well, he begins to expropriate a lot of assets that under Batista had gone to a handful of very rich people. So he's sort of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, let's say. And this causes a lot of Cubans, especially the rich ones, but maybe not just the rich ones, to flee to the nearby U.S. And in the U.S., they form what's known as Brigade 2506, a counter-revolutionary militia unit, which is funded by the CIA.
I thought you were going to say, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
You guessed it, Donald Pleasance.
He really wanted that sugar.
He did. So in 1961, just after JFK gets inaugurated, this idea is hatched that the brigade, that 1,400 Cuban exiles living in the U.S. are going to invade Cuba, with the U.S. discreetly providing supplies and training and cover, but trying to do it so that it looked like these were Cubans invading Cuba rather than the U.S. invading Cuba, which would look bad from the international perspective, right? But here's the thing. People, especially 1,400 people, aren't good at keeping secrets. So word totally got out. It's not quite clear how, but word totally got out. The Cubans totally saw that this was coming. Maybe it went out to Soviet agents. Maybe it went out through family members talking. Who knows? Cubans absolutely knew that the Americans were coming, and they knew about when it was going to happen. They were totally prepared for it. And so when the Americans did land, they thwarted the invasion. Now, there was also an issue where you may have heard this idea before, that sometimes when America likes to invade a place, they assume that they're going to be greeted as liberators.
Yeah, that never really works out, does it?
No, and it seems like a lot of the Cubans who had left and who were quite sure that Castro was despised by the local populace, they were quite convinced that they were going to rise up against Castro. Well, that didn't happen at all. I don't know what exactly the common take on Castro was at the time, but it certainly wasn't, we need to kick this guy out immediately. So that didn't happen. And also the international community had figured out what was going on. And so JFK had to basically not provide as much support as was originally planned to the invading force. So they were left absolutely high and dry. And so Castro's people picked up the invaders and put them in prisons. And indeed, many of them were executed, as we see in today's movie. This is all a massive international relations failure for the U.S. And boy, if Castro wasn't friendly with the USSR before the Bay of Pigs invasion, he certainly became so now. And that eventually would lead to the following year's Cuban Missile Crisis, which Coleman has absolutely no interest in, it seems. So that's sort of the historic thing, as best as I can put it together quickly. It's a real whoopsie doodle on behalf of the U.S.
Yeah, do you suppose that the only reason that there is a Fidel Castro in this movie is that Coleman Francis knew a guy with a beard, and that was it?
I mean, that might be it. that totally might be it. It also might be that it's not that hard to find a guy with a beard who then therefore looks like Fidel Castro when you put him in fatigues. It's not that hard casting. I did like that the jail cell that our heroes spend their time in is just vaguely scrawled with Viva Cuba on it.
That reminds me of one of the great things I found in trying to find anything on Fidel Castro, just in relation to today's movie, as well as the Bay of Pigs invasion, is that some wag, some jokester, made a great picture of Fidel Castro. Instead of holding up a newspaper, he's holding up a shirt that says Red Zone Cuba.
Oh, that's great. It also sort of goes to show that like the basic premise of this movie probably doesn't make a lot of sense, because the whole point of the Bay of Pigs invasion was that it was meant to look like Cubans invading Cuba. So you wouldn't just hire a bunch of white guys with no Spanish to go invade. Like that just...
You would think.
It's just... this movie didn't need to have any of this.
No, but this movie also didn't need to happen.
No, indeed. Anyway, that's your little history lesson. Go learn it properly somewhere else now.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 tiny tidbits about today's episode, Red Zone Cuba. Go, Adam, go!
The good speech maker in today's short speech is none other than Herc Harvey, director of Carnival of Souls. We discussed Harvey, his involvement with Centron, and Carnival of Souls on It's Just a Show episode 60. Link in the show notes.
The rollicking opening number, sung by John Carradine, is titled Night Train to Mundo Fine, which was also the original title of today's film. Night Train to Mundo Fine kind of, but not really, translates to Night Train to the End of the World. Coleman's like a real bleak onion, with each layer revealing another dark and dreary aspect to the film.
Hearing John Carradine's deep yet mumbly voice, Crow suggests the actor had a future in the Canadian alt-rock scene at the time.
Then I joined the Crash Test Dummies.
Did you happen to...
Winnipeg's Crash Test Dummies were known for Brad Roberts' distinct baritone voice on hit songs like and The Ballad of Peter Pumpkinhead. Mike had recently dressed up as Brad Roberts for a sketch in the episode Codename Diamond Head.
And during the title song, Mike adds a few lyrics of his own.
Play that funky music.
Drink night train, go to the basketball game, throw up under the bleachers.
Night Train Express is a, quote, citrus wine beverage with over 17% alcohol and a $4.99 price tag. Jake Joliet drinks a whole bottle of the stuff in the Blues Brothers, and while I never got around to trying Night Train, a cursory search on the internet suggests it smells like a cross between rubbing alcohol and grape cough syrup. Yummy!
Seeing the less than impressive training sequences in today's film, Crow quips,
We do more before noon than most people do before 10.
This is a play on the classic Be All That You Can Be Army commercials from the 80s, which featured the slogan, We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day.
We've gotten this wrong before in our episode on Time Chasers, but we're assured this time Cherokee Jack's plane really is a Cessna. According to the IMDb, that plane is still flying over 50 years later, somewhere up in Alaska. Oh, unless that's a euphemism, and a plane flying up in Alaska is like a dog that now lives in a farm upstate.
When asking Ruby about her husband, whom our stooge-like trio left behind in Cuba, Tom offers this bizarre reference.
My husband is Amanda Bierce.
Bierce, best known as Marcy Darcy on Married with Children, or for her role in the fantastic horror film Fright Night, had recently come out as gay when this episode aired. And that's the joke, ladies and gentlemen. Just, isn't it funny that Amanda Bierce is gay? That's it.
Ruby and her husband are sitting on a mine with lots of valuable minerals in it, like diamonds, tungsten, and pitchblende. Wait, what's pitchblende? Well, it turns out it's an old-timey word for uraninite, which, as you might guess from the name, is full of uranium. Oh, if only Coleman had made it to the mine and gone radioactive, he might have turned into some sort of murderous bunny hugger.
When Deep 13 receives a call from Jimmy Carter, that's none other than MST3K wunderkind Trace Beaulieu providing the voice, reprising his Killer Carter from Season 5's Warrior of the Lost World. Wait, if Trace was the one in the sketch in the bandages, but it's his voice on the line, then who was Phone?
During one of the sketches, Mike and the bots in fancy Monte Carlo tuxes propose a delightful game of, quote,
High-stakes pull tabs, perhaps?
Pull tabs are sort of like lottery scratch cards, except the answers are behind perforated tabs that you pull off. Also, they typically come in a set of like 1,000 cards, let's say, out of which a certain number have prizes, which means that if you've sold the first 100 cards and all the best prizes have been taken, you know that there's no point in buying any of the remaining cards. It's all a bit weird, and so of course it's especially popular in Minnesota.
During the Bay of Pigs invasion, as our heroes are climbing up the cliffs, Mike declares,
It's the Shining Path Fantasy Camp.
"Oh boy." The Shining Path is a communist party of Peru, and they engaged in a lot of guerrilla warfare in that famously mountainous country. Their leaders were captured in 1992 and imprisoned for a massacre that killed 69 peasants, and oh god, none of this is remotely fun at all. I guess Coleman Francis films make us all think dark thoughts. Ugh.
Mike wears a wig and a boa and declares himself to be a few different celebrities, starting with Carol Channing. Hey, have you heard about the time I was in the same room as Carol Channing? If not, sign up for our Patreon and listen to the bonus bit for episode 21 of the KTMA Gamera vs. Baragon to find out all about it.
The melody to the bouncy upbeat song, which closes out this episode, was unsurprisingly written by MST3K's go-to music guy, Mike Nelson. The off-the-wall and strangely touching lyrics, particularly Gypsy's solo, were written by the off-the-wall and strangely touching TV's Frank Conniff.
And that's time. Let us talk for a moment, though, about the short.
Yes, it's time we learned about plenty of lip and tongue action.
No, that's not this short.
Oh, man, I keep thinking it is.
No, this is the one about posture that isn't the one with the kids. It's another one about posture. It's about how you should have the right posture when you're giving a speech. I don't know if you've given a lot of speeches.
Actually, yes.
Oh, have you been a Toastmaster?
I have not been a Toastmaster unless you count high school. Basically, when I was a kid, I just treated speeches as an excuse to do stand-up, since there was no way for like a kid in grades 7 to 12 to do that in Newfoundland. So that's kind of what I did. I would just kind of like riff on a topic for 5 minutes.
Oh, wow. So you were in debate club or something?
No. That was just like a regular part of our English class, is that we had to do speeches, which is something that everybody dreaded.
What?
Yeah.
That's weird.
That was a part of the curriculum.
Huh.
And even at the best of times, like I am a ball of anxiety, so I really hate going first. But my speeches were popular enough that like the teachers who knew that no one wanted to go first, and that's not uncommon, got everyone to put their names in a hat. But my speeches had gotten so popular to the point where there was one class where I got called first, but I checked the hat and everyone had put in my name.
That's fantastic.
And I refused to go first because that was cheating.
That was cheating, but that's a different short as well.
Yes, I learned from a different Centron short about that.
Well, I was watching this short and I was thinking about you because, as you alluded to, you did a bit of stand-up for a while there. Mm-hmm. Some people might remember that we used to have a podcast together about this sort of thing called You're Not Funny, in which you would talk about your stand-up days, and I would pepper you with questions because it was something that I always thought maybe I could do, but I never did. And maybe that's for the best. But anyway, I was wondering about what your posture was like as a stand-up, because, you know, a lot of different stand-ups, some of them do hold themselves with the confidence that this short encourages you to do, but a lot of them try to, you know, show their angst, let's say, through their posture by curling up over the mic or things like that.
The Sturm and Drang of stand-up.
Exactly.
What I witnessed, that was the thing, you know, not thinking about this short while I was a stand-up, but like watching it freshly again. I certainly saw a lot of people who fell into that telephone pole stereotype, as that's what a lot of people would do. They would freeze up and just stay as remote and still as possible while delivering their jokes, which only really works if you're a certain type. It's great if you're a Stephen Wright type.
Though he wouldn't do that.
No, he would wander around. But it could certainly work. It could certainly work. But for the most part, it's like you just had people standing very, very still, awkwardly talking about their dates as, you know, a comical anime bead of sweat went down their face. But no, I mean, what I found, I certainly tried a few things. I did a few sets where I was just sitting down just to see what that would be like. Personally, I found that didn't really work for me. And I would sometimes wander around, especially like early on. But what I found actually to be the most comfortable was leaning on the mic stand.
Right. That's what I remember you doing from the few times I've seen you do stand-up.
Yeah, that was the most enjoyable thing, because there's something inherently, I think, maybe not to audiences, but certainly for me, if I was an audience member and I see a stand-up who is leaning against the mic stand like Bugs Bunny leaning against a tree, and the carrot is a microphone, like that to me just struck me as like a good way to relax and to tell the audience to relax. And I sort of made this a bit of a thing in that sometimes I would just, if I were to ever move around, then I would just take the mic stand with me and drag it like a club.
So you say that it's to make the audience relax, but unlike a tree, the mic stand doesn't look like it can support your weight. And so it often feels like there's a bit of imbalance, or there's like, like this cannot hold this position, this tableau that we've got in front of us. Mm-hmm. At some point, it's going to be off balance. And so there's a lot of like nervous energy to that, which I think could totally work in a stand-up scenario in a way that maybe couldn't work if you're giving this kind of speech to the ladies' club or whatever.
That's true. But it certainly gives the illusion of comfort. And that's definitely something you want to communicate to an audience, which is not to say, oh, I'm scared.
Right. No, you definitely didn't seem scared. You were not the rocking horse type. You were not the telephone pole type. You didn't have those kinds of blatant, I do not want to be on stage vibes.
Mm-hmm. Although I'm very tempted to return to stand up and just do that weird barrel chested thing where the guy like hugs himself and then kind of like rocks back and forth, which is like a mixture of the rocking horse thing, but also it's like, I don't know where the self hug comes in, but it's a weird look and I like it. I guess for other topics to discuss on this episode, I'm drawing a blank. A Mel Blanc, that is.
Oh, that's right. There is somebody who gets compared to Mel Blanc at some point.
It's Mel Blanc.
Yeah, so that's enough reason to shoehorn him as a topic, because we're running out of things to talk about when it comes to Coleman Francis.
This movie doesn't have a lot to talk about. Coffee made an appearance again. That was nice.
And of course, Coleman got gunned down at the end.
And of course, this is as good a time as any to let people know that if they want those free tickets to see Frank and Trace, they should send an email to info@itsjustashow.com with their favorite picture of Donald Pleasance.
That's right. The most striking picture of Donald Pleasance will be rewarded. No, it'll be randomly drawn. It'll be randomly chosen. But get him in by Saturday night, Saturday the 18th. That'll be fantastic. Now, Mel Blanc. He's totally worth talking about. I don't think we've ever really brought him up before, except maybe when we've talked about his appearances on the Jack Benny program. Yeah, and in fact, that's one of the things that I know him best from. I mean, I would be lying if I said I knew him better for this than I did for the Looney Tunes characters, or even from what like Hanna-Barbera work that I grew up with. No. But it's just that one of the most distinctive sounds came from his performances on the Jack Benny program. And that's, of course, that he was the voice, sort of Jack Benny's car. It was not a My Mother the Car scenario. He was just providing all the sputtering and wheezing and such.
Yeah, he could do it better than I can. But yes, Jack Benny, famously tight with his money, drives around an ancient old jalopy, which was voiced by Mel Blanc. Man of a thousand voices. If you don't know who Mel Blanc is, well, shame on you, I suppose. But obviously most known as the Looney Tunes guy, as the voice of Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and all those good peeps.
Mm-hmm. And like, that's part of what made him great, I think, is that he really seemed to understand, or grew to understand, what you could do in terms of trickery in the studio. Because in addition to creating voices, he also kind of worked with what kind of like pitch and tempo and speed that those voices should have. So like famously, I think Porky Pig is not like him doing that in the studio. It's him recording as Porky Pig doing the stutter and then getting the engineers to speed that up as much as possible so it sounds more nervous and frantic.
Wow.
Yeah.
That makes sense. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And of course, one of the things I loved about the Looney Tunes is that sputtering sound made so many appearances whenever, say, a World War II jet was running out of juice. Or perhaps gremlins were on a plane that Bugs Bunny was on, which happened in at least one cartoon that I can think of.
Yes.
But what do you know about Mel Blanc and his car crash?
Did he provide the voice for it? I don't know anything about it.
No. This is a thing that happened to him. So he got into a bad automobile accident. And there's a great podcast called 20,000 Hertz that has the whole story on this. We'll have a link in our show notes. But essentially, the story was that Mel Blanc was in a coma, and despite all attempts to reach him by doctors and by his son, nothing. They would get no results. But if they started asking questions to Bugs Bunny, Blanc would respond in Bugs Bunny's voice, and they eventually got him to come out of it by asking, essentially, the cartoon all-stars to come to the rescue.
Now that you say that, I have heard this story before, and it's a fantastic story. Mm-hmm. That is great. I think, is it great? I don't know. Maybe it's terrible, but I'm glad it worked.
It worked, and he was fine. And it got to the point where like he was so ready to go back to work that he was recording in a full body cast for some projects.
Sure.
So yeah, Mel Blanc, workhorse, man of 1,000 voices, and a man whose voices came to rescue him when he needed it most. So Chris, do we have time for one more thing?
I think we have plenty of time for one more thing. I have run out of things to say, however. So, do you have one more thing?
Yes, I have to talk not just about an actor, but a chanteuse of this film, namely John Carradine.
Oh, yes. I guess we should talk something about him. Although he is in another MST3K movie, I think. At least one other.
Yeah, so we'll save like all the other John Carradine facts for when we cover The Unearthly. But this, I think, is so good that it deserves mentioning now. So John Carradine, you know, he was an actor and an actor of some talent. You wouldn't know that from most of his MST3K footage because he's doing the absolute worst, though I think he is shining in those terrible movies that he's in. He's certainly the only bit of good acting that you get in Red Zone Cuba.
That's true.
And certainly the only good singing. But John Carradine was seemingly a man with a sense of humor about his life and his work, because when it came time to get a license plate for his Mercedes-Benz, he did not get the usual license plate. He got a vanity one, and he specifically got a vanity one that said ham on it. And I always kind of liked John Carradine, but finding that out today made me love him all the more.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you know any interesting facts about John Carradine that we should save up for when we do The Unearthly, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. We'd especially love to hear from you if you'd like those tickets to see Frank and Trace riff live in a few days. You can send the thing that we asked you to send earlier in the episode to info@itsjustashow. Don't forget to do it. This show is made possible by listeners just like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show, and you can listen to all our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that we mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/74.
Well, that's exciting. We just wrapped up one of the major legacies of MST3K because you know what? Like Coleman Francis may have died penniless. He may have died bloated. He may have died under influence of drink and God knows what else. It's a tragedy, the story. But his legacy lives on and he is somewhat celebrated as the worst filmmaker to possibly ever live, but certainly the worst filmmaker to ever be featured on this show.
That's true. I hope we did him justice. I hope everybody who was so excited about our Coleman Francis trilogy appreciated it or enjoyed it, or, you know, that you didn't hate it. At least don't hate it.
If anything, they're less tired than we are having gone through it.
Yes. Oh, boy. Well, we need to figure out what we're going to do next.
Something classy? Maybe a Universal picture?
Yeah, I think so. You know, a couple years ago, we started going down through all the season 8 shows. And then after a few, we stopped because, you know, we wanted to do other things. And then neither Beth nor you wanted to do it again for a good long time. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to put my foot down. At some point, we need to get to these. So let's do a few more season 8 episodes, starting with where we left off with season 8, episode 5, The Thing That Couldn't Die.
Now, we already did this one. This is about that brain that couldn't die.
Yes, except now the brain is a thing, and it's different.
Okay, all right, I'll allow it. And I think it was the brain that wouldn't die, not the brain that couldn't die. But maybe an alternate title would be the brain that shouldn't die.
True. Anyway, we'll see what this one's all about. It's a thing that couldn't die. I mean, that's pretty specific.
Yeah, I don't know if I've even ever seen this episode, so I have no idea what. Oh, wait, it's about the girl who's psychic. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay. So, yeah, I've seen this, but I have very dim memories of it, so I have no idea what to expect.
Is this another Universal movie?
It is indeed. Yeah, I think it's Universal and not AIP. I think we get to AIP after that with the Undead, the next part in this little arc of season 8.
All right. Well, that'll switch it up a bit. That'll change things.
But it's still a black and white, low budget movie. So we're still in familiar territory after the micro budgets of Coleman Francis.
This is also where we get introduced to the observers.
Yes, yeah. So we get not just Bill Corbett as the main observer that we'll get to know throughout the series, but also Mike and I think Paul Chaplin are the other two.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be a thing to look out for next time. So until then,
Keep feeding soda pop to thirsty pigs.
is it dead yet? Take it away, Theme Squad.
It's just a show, a show. It's just a show. It's just a show, a show. It's just a show. It's just a show, a show. It's just a show. It's just a show, a show. It's just a show. It is just a show. It's just a show.
Yeah, he could do it better than I can, but yes.